Okay, everyone, to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today, I have a really cool review from a really nice upstart micro brand. Unfortunately, not one you can get your hands on right now, but the good news is they are pending some future releases. This is from Imperial Watch Company. They were founded out of the US by a young Coast Guard veteran whose passion for timepieces took him from building mods into building his own micro brand. In terms of the type of watch, you can clearly see this is a dive watch. Some key common characteristics and design when you're looking for a diver. Of course, you're going to want water resistance, typically some type of screw down crown. You want something that's tough, legible with a dive time bezel, and a diver's extension is always nice if on bracelet. This is their Royalguard 200. And with a heavy nod to the vintage skin divers of the 1950s, designed to be sleek, elegant, and more wearable timepieces for the gentleman diver. The whole concept is really that they want this watch to be elegant enough for royalty, but tough enough for the Royal Guard. These go for $450 direct, and they are currently sold out in terms of that initial run. But again, they are pending some future variations. So the owner reached out to me to kind of get a hands-on when it comes to this particular prototype. I was happy to kind of take a look and share with you guys because, you know, with future runs coming out, it's good to kind of know what else is out there. And this one has a really unique look. Some of you will see this and you can't quite put your finger on it. And there's basically like an old Eberhard diver that was very similar. I believe it was the Scapograph. And correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I think they did a really good job of recapturing a quite niche watch, while at the same time just really capturing kind of the era itself, as well as just a really great choice of colors and tones that I think go together really well. So with all that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Okay guys, so Imperial Watch Company, check it out. So some of you are looking at this going, wow, that is an awesome looking vintage inspired diver. And some of you are going, oh no, another vintage inspired diver. Hey, I've been on both sides of that coin, and honestly, I wasn't in a huge rush to check this one out in particular, mostly just because the space is so saturated. But I will say, once I got this thing in hand and started noticing these little details, like check out the beautiful bevel work on that. Oh my gosh, look at the side of that case. That is really nicely done. Look at the teeth on the bezel grip. Then the way just the color palette comes together, you do have that faded midnight bezel, so it's a blue color, but it looks basically like it was naturally faded from a black color. You are getting that old radium style lume, but everything has been gilted to really just kind of soak in that warmth. So this thing is sweet. The bracelet itself has a beautiful taper to it. You're getting drilled lugs. Honestly, when I see this, I actually think it would be really outstanding on something like a strap, just because of how nice and delicate the finishing is there. Like, let me give it a quick wipe just to really kind of optimize for you guys the level of transition and the crispness. That is really impressive for under 500 bucks, 450 direct. And again, that initial run did sell out. But this thing is gorgeous. And another nice thing is that it has, of course, a sapphire crystal. I know some brands really insist on having plexiglass, Hasselite, whatever, but you know what? When you can have a sapphire that looks this good, why not? Maybe some of you would say, okay, well, when I look at a certain angle directly on, you know, at the very far edges, I can see a bit of a milky ring there. You know, again, that's how often are you going to really be focusing on that? And I will say it might show up well on camera, but if you were to have this in your hand, it's actually much harder to get that kind of effect to happen. A lot of it also has to do with the lighting situation, so you can see quite legible even at harsh angle there. You're getting a 37 millimeter diameter case with a 38 millimeter, I'm sorry, 38 millimeter diameter across the bezel, 14 millimeter thickness, and that is including that crystal, which does take up a good amount of that real estate in terms of height. This does wear quite svelte, especially considering how small it is in diameter. It does make the thickness, you know, a little bit more evident. Let's say if this was like a 42 and it was this thick, you probably wouldn't notice it as much. The nice thing is it's very contoured. So although it is on the thicker side, the contour really makes it feel quite thin and still quite minimal when it is on your wrist. And, you know, things like that box dome sapphire are also part of that equation, because that is something that gives you a little bit of visual height. But, you know, in reality, the thickness is actually, you know, much thinner if you just kind of discount that protrusion. Now, one odd thing I found on here was the bezel mechanism. It is only 96 clicks, meaning it's from you know, 12 to 5. That's normally how I count them out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's 8 clicks to 5. So essentially then 8 times 12 is going to be 96. If it was 120 clicks, it would have been 10 clicks. If it was a 60 click, it would have been 5 clicks. I don't think many people, when they're turning a bezel, are actually counting the clicks. So it honestly doesn't really matter, but it is something that is a little odd that I noticed. It doesn't affect the usability at all. I mean, it's still going to line up wherever you need it to in terms of, you know, on each of those second markers. There'll be a slight variation, of course, but at the end of the day, if you're a professional diver, you're probably going to have a dive computer. And if you're recreational, you're probably not going to really, you know, need this down to the perfect hash mark alignment, although the alignment itself is generally quite good. It's just the fact that the mechanism is a 96 click unidirectional rotating with that nice aluminum insert. I'll say from the top and bottom is not quite as grippy, but you can push down and grip that way, or it's a lot better if you just kind of get it from these angles here. And the nice thing is, because it does have that aluminum insert, you know, things like fingerprints are going to be much less evident while you're using it. Nice and clicky, quite smooth. There's a little, you can see a little bit of play there in the back play. Would have been worse if it was a 60 click bezel, I'm sure. So this is going to be a little bit tighter, but still giving you some of those vintage feels in the hand. Let me just give it a quick little wipe there. Inside, although you can't see it, is going to be your automatic Seiko Instruments NH35. So basically, it's kind of a third-party applicable version of Seiko's 4R35. So this does have a date position on it because it's the 35, but I actually prefer the 35 over the 38, which is a no date kind of skeletonized version, just because I prefer the crisper click when you are actually popping the crown out. I find that on the 38, that basically the action on the crown, not the winding, but the crown itself can be mushy at times on that NH38. Now, getting into some more of the details here, this dial is fantastic. Gloss black, gilt printed, no date, gilt pointer hands that are loomed, and then of course you do have that Swiss vintage loom or old radium, and then this is you know, it is quite modern in the fact that it has 200 meters of water resistance, 20 millimeter lugs that are drilled, which can make that a real strap monster. And then you have this vintage 3-link bracelet with the brushed center links and polished outer flanks, push button friction pin connectors here. So you're not going to have screw pins, but it's also quite thin, and it has a very nice taper down to it. So it's going to taper from 20 millimeters down to 16, so a nice 4 millimeter taper. And then you get this stamped push button double locking clasp that does have a nice milled folding section. And then you do get 4 each micro adjust positions so that you can really dial in that fit. And I will say also that this post here is actually so strong that you really have to push down, or you can just click the buttons to close it, which I found myself doing more often than not, is just clicking and putting down versus pushing down and getting that heavy snap. Just because, you know, that most of this is going to be pressed, although I will say it flows really well in terms of the aesthetic. You know, you're not going to want to push down on it. It's not super confidence inspiring to like and hit that click really hard if you can avoid it. One thing that I mentioned, and I guess I kind of strayed away from, was with how beautiful this finishing is, it just made me think like you got to put this thing on like a really nice strap that has really sweet finishing. And then I thought about my crown and buckle, you know, Noble strapped Chevron Noble, and how beautiful the hardware is. I'm just like, oh man, if this was my personal watch, ooh, I think I might have swapped that out and tried something that looks really good. So very cool. I do like this one a lot in terms of the way it looks, but let's go ahead and see how it wears. Okay guys, as you can see on my 7.5 inch wrist, although this is a smaller diver, it actually wears really nice. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it does have slightly longer lugs, although they do have a little bit of a curvature to them, and they are quite thin, which helps everything kind of flow into that bracelet and then that dramatic taper. For me, with a larger wrist, it helps balance the watch out really well because it does have quite a small dial and not really a large bezel, so it'd be easy for something like this to feel a bit undersized. Of course, unless you get it really close to the camera, which means you're going to get some lens distortion. It's going to make it look a lot bigger. But you can see there with just a little, some of the details, it rides on the wrist really well and feels like a sporty dive watch. But what I'll do is I'll keep my hand a little bit further down and just tighten up the shot so you guys can get those details without as much of the lens distortion, so you can kind of get a better idea of and a truer aspect ratio of how this might render on your own wrist. And you can see this thing's gorgeous. I love the color play here. I almost think if it had like just a dash of red, maybe like a red triangle, would have just, you know, added that extra you know, in terms of the color play to really make this thing pop. I do think it looks great as it is, don't get me wrong, but I feel like with the kind of the two tones, it'd be nice to have just 1/3 kind of color that's in there, just mixing things up. So I think that would have been really cool. But hey, they're coming out with new iterations as well. You know, and some of those color combinations might get you going. So with that said, let's go ahead and what we'll do is we'll get this off the wrist, set up for some loom shots, the light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. As you can see, really nice loom. Another nice detail is look at that seconds hand. It perfectly aligns and is just perfectly sized as it goes around those circular indices, which I really like. Same goes for that triangle pointer there on the minutes hand. So again, you do get that really cool feature where things just kind of line up. It just feels very intuitive to be read, which again, I can appreciate. But one thing I always like to work in, of course, is some low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, maybe hanging out underneath the shade of a tree or in your favorite automobile. So it's nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting. So maybe even include some harsh high contrast lighting, which typically will expose any type of production defects. But in this case, you can just see how uniform the light glides over that brushing and the luster on the polishing. The only thing that's going to hinder that is just, you know, a couple fingerprints, a little bit of oil, of course, from handling. And this is a a loaner that has gone around here and there, so I don't expect it to be in perfect condition. But it is nice to see how this dial represents itself again in different types of lighting situations, and you can see that black, deep, inky, glossy dial just stays black. It's never gonna have like some weird anthracite, and some people like that, right? If you have more of a matted dial, but this dial really stays and just dials up the contrast really, really well. And you can see even that aluminum bezel insert, although not fully loomed, the pip is doing quite a good job. And then just the light itself is captured really nicely around that bezel insert to make it still quite legible. Reminds me a little bit of that original Black Bay Blue with the black dial, blue bezel insert. The whole idea having that kind of pre-fade done to it, except here you're going to get the beautiful gilt playing off of, again, that deep inky black dial, which works wonders. I mean, it really, really works. So guys, closing thoughts on the wrist. This wears really well, and not undersized considering that 38mm silhouette on my 7.5-inch wrist. It has just really balanced proportions. The case and bezel finishing are actually quite impressive, especially under 500 bucks. This thing is a potential strap monster with that 20mm lug width and those drilled lugs. On a premium nylon, on a tropic strap or a sailcloth strap, this could really play and I think would really come to life. Not to say that the bracelet isn't nice. It's just, again, where the way that the color plays and the way the finishing plays, I think you could just add a little bit more personality by swapping out the strap. In terms of comparable models, the $500 micro brand diver space is extremely competitive and saturated with vintage-inspired divers. So what sets this Royalguard apart? I think it's the overall balance and design. It feels classic, but not completely derivative. Yeah, of course, if you go one-to-one with the watch that inspired it, you'll see that. But honestly, like, I feel like it bends the rules a little bit just because it's less of an iconic watch. It's kind of, a hidden one that most people may have never seen. And if you do that, then that's cool too. But, the general language, if you were going to take an aesthetic, I think they made a good choice, and they really put things together in a way that is quite impressive, even just apart from the design, but just getting into the actual execution. So I think, a nice comparable would be something like my Baltic Aquascaf. Sure, it's not quite as refined, but it's also not quite as expensive as the Aquascaf. It kind of captures that similar charm. So, like, actually, let's do this. I haven't done this in a while. Let's go ahead and zoom out, and again, well, let's close this really off the cuff. Check that out. So, in terms of them being smaller sized, but then having a larger bezel overhang, but you can see the proportions are quite different here. You have a larger dial opening, more open space with a smaller bezel. Here you're getting a little bit more of an even layout, and then a bit more crowded in terms of that dial real estate, but it does fill the dial really well, and what's filled on the dial is quite gorgeous with the gilt colorways. But yeah, these just kind of reminded me of each other in that again, you can get a modern reinterpretation of a really vintage look. Of course, this is going to be a bit more expensive, but it's gonna, you're gonna get a couple benefits with it in terms of the movement choice. But still, this Royalguard, I think, definitely holds its own, especially in terms of the case finishing. This is a nice, really, really nice watch. I'm curious to see what other variations come out in the future. So bottom line for me, while the space is crowded, the Royalguard is definitely one of the better, vintage inspired divers I've seen in a while, which is saying something because I've really got a sweet tooth for the skin diver space, if you guys are fans of the channel. So a lot of the Seiko reissues, and of course tons of stuff from different micro brands, and even some heritage brands that are bringing back some older designs. So this one, again, I think what really worked for it and make it stand out is the really nice colorways that they've chosen. I think do stand out, and it's just a really nice play on something being aged finished and patinaed, and then you're also getting, again, quite impressive case finishing, which I really dig. So yeah, I think this will really be quite a strap monster. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you like the video, please do a like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.